All right, I'm going to try to make a straightforward description of what my ontology entails, using ontology sort of in the framework of Trick's idea of what really exists. That's not actually what I think of the word ontology, by the way. I think of it as what is a system is logically dependent on. So, for example, the ontology of mathematics is, in some cases, set theory or whatever. Or is it? Maybe it needs more, right? So you're digging into your dependencies and especially your hidden dependencies. But anyway, in terms of the ontology of materiality, what material exists, all that I know exists is the stream of perceptions. Now people don't want that. They're like, no, but I'm interested in the fundamentals. Okay, but you're, like I say, you're out on a limb already at that point. For your epistemology, you have to do it in terms of your images. And everything is in terms of your images. Seems like a limitation, but in reality, since everything you can experience comes through this stream of images, you have everything. So for example, let's say you have the knowledge of celestial mechanics and Newtonian mechanics, so you can fly to the moon. How do you know you're really going to the real moon? it Going to the real moon is actually defined as changing your images of your perception so that it appears that you're, but what if you're not really there? Well, yeah, you might be hallucinating. There's ways to try to deal with that problem, but there isn't a way to like use reason to just eliminate the problem. It has to be employed precisely because of problems like that. So if I'm going to drop a 5 pound weight onto a milk dud, and I can make the prediction of what's going to happen in that situation. And the way I see it is, I'm saying if I have an image of holding this, the feeling of the weight, it could all be generated by a matrix and according, to a proper epistemology. It doesn't matter because, yeah, you're relating one set of images to a subsequent. Celestial mechanics, it's just a system that can predict what I'll see if I look in the sky at a particular time. That's what's impressive about it. The Michelson-Morley experiment is just some apparatus that if I set it up and look at it, I will have a certain experience, and I can draw certain conclusions from that experience that starts to go out on the limb, the more conclusions I draw from it. But that I can set it up and see it and experience, and that's all in my perceptions. And if it was all generated in a matrix, what we're relying on is not what's generating it, but the fact that it's so consistent. That's how we tell the difference of a hallucination and reality. Is that hallucination you could double take and generally be gone, and if it's a persistent hallucination, we have other ways, which is co-agency of asking other people. Notice you're just getting an image, visual and sound images of that other person telling you that. Is that not good enough? Well, it works pretty good. But if you want more than that, well, you can't because you're getting everything through this stream of perception. So when we're talking about something like what are fields, to me, I experience images that are spatial, meaning there's here and over here, right? And a field is just a mathematical understanding of a spatial situation, right? Yeah, physically, because the word field is not just from science, but in the physical fields, they're saying there's the equivalent of a vector. It's not like there's a little arrow out there, but there's a value at that point in space, and the value has direction, right? And that so my question is not, is that really what's going on out there though? My question is, does that actually accurately map and handle my perceptions of space, my perception of magnets that repel or attract, my where stars are going to be tomorrow, right? So this is all you need for a complete set of relationships, because although you don't want to be reasoning about just your own perceptions, uh, that's what you're doing. And the fact that other people seem to have related perceptions, and that's one of the reasons to believe they have agency similar to your own. Now, I don't expect that out there is the exact same thing in the field, but I do believe it's related because it appears through our close setting up of these experiments that we're receiving photons into our eyeballs. So the fact that it gets in our brain is part of a chain reaction that if there's an out there, it comes from out there. If out there is a computer matrix or what we used to call brain in the vat before the Matrix movie, then um, then it's sending the images. And either way, celestial mechanics will so far tell me. Now if it seems like a universe where there are physical laws and they're consistent. If it's a computer and some guy hacks it one day, the thing is, at this point, we would notice that. We would notice if the force of gravity suddenly changed, except for that we'd probably die pretty quickly. So I'm not wondering if it matches. I'm sure there's more than one way because I draw a lot of meaning from the fact that you can coordinate space with Cartesian coordinates and polar coordinates, and I take a lot, or hyperbolic or exponential or all kinds of weird spaces. And I take a lot from the fact that dimensionality is a real thing. Why? Because dimensionality is a relationship between all of these alternate, right? To put a coordinate system on a piece of, you know, two-dimensional poster paper, you have to use at least two free variables. That's what makes it two-dimensional. And the fact that that is abstracted from having more than one system and seeing what they have in common. When you have more than one system that you can pretty much prove are like equivalent, so if one works, you can make the other one work, then that's interesting. And you have reasons for these alternate views of fields and space, for example. Um, if they can prove that they work, then you can look for the relationships between them. You know, polar coordinates equations for circles are really simple and convenient to work with. In uh, Cartesian coordinates, not so much, but quadratic equations are easy to deal with. And there's some things. I was, what was the equation I was looking for? But there's equations. Oh yeah, I had the idea of how do you draw a sine wave in polar coordinates? And so I wrote some programs and then I had to do some research because how it turned out is you can't. It's an unsolvable equation. You have the r and the theta, right? You have the equation in Cartesian coordinates for a sine wave, and you convert that into polar coordinates, and you can't separate the terms because it's a trigonometry mixed with the theta in such a way and r in such a way you can't separate them. So there's no solution just to do that. There's still algorithmic methods, but you can't just solve the math and draw it. So different coordinate systems still have certain limitations. It's kind of like in some numeric bases, you get an infinite number of digits for numbers, where in another numeric base, you don't. So for example, in decimal, 1/3 is 0.3233 for infinity, but in base 3, it's just zero point 0.1. So there's reasons to have these alternates, even though you can show on some level their equivalency, or you can just survey their similarities. But saying it's an illusion, I don't know. I think a lot of times it's the idea. What the illusion is that you're assuming it has to be out there, but really we're just getting the images. The idea of a field is because it applies to those images so well. What's really out there, I personally like to just call it information, unknown information. The information that we think we know, or whatever would say that we know, is stuff we've already experienced. So out there is a bunch of entropic, unknown information. Is it really this way or that way? That's fun to find out and look at it. And we should expect there's going to be alternate equivalent ways. I mean, we should know that already. For example, I mean, quantum mechanics and relativism, general relativity, both are very good theories that make very subtle predictions that have been confirmed to a large degree, and yet they're not compatible with each other. That tells us there's some other system where they could be compatible. There's some gist of things that doesn't have these two separate things that sort of are hard to mix together, right? Wouldn't that seem logical? So we know you can be highly accurate and have a very apt metaphor, very apt mathematics, and there's something missing, the unification. That's why science is really just a lot of unification, right? We're trying to explain all these different apples we see with a unified theory of apples. Right? We have the extension of apples, we want to explain it. And then similarly, when I'm thinking of tawns, you know, okay, I don't have to see the tawns right now. You're trying to explain other things I do see. So that's what you have to do. And if you deny that my lion eyes of what I have seen, right? So I had to spend a long time in that class when we were doing all the physics and then ended up in lab having to do the Michelson-Morley experiment. So the whole thing, all the mathematics, why it meant, what it was going to mean, and then I had to do it. And so I found that quite convincing. And if I'm told, well, nobody ever does these things, I find that, you know, not as convincing as having gone through that experience itself, right? And yet the whole experience was just in my images as a subjective person, and all the implication that I could make about it, since I might be in Vishnu's dream, my truly technically spoken prediction about it is that if I set up that apparatus again correctly, I would see a compatible result. We'll call it compatible, not necessarily the same. I'd be in a different room, but a compatible result. So I'm saying if I set up the images, you know, or if I experienced setting up the images the correct way, and I ran the experience looking at myself from my own point of view, running the experiment, then I would get a compatible result. I would appear, I would have the perception of a compatible result. And I think, you know, we have no choice but to work out from here. And at the esoteric parts way off in the branch, it's always within reference to this. So when you're arguing these things, because I have a third position from you too, when you're arguing these things, it's important to ask what are the extension, what are the real things that you've seen a pattern that you have some argument that there's a similarity in these things, and then you have a intentional theory that tries to explain that phenomena which you know is in your head, right? That intentional part you know is in your head. The extension could be from the matrix, it could be out there as material like I believe, like most of us believe. It could be Vishnu's dream, who knows? That part is beyond our actual epistemology. But by going with what appears to be the case with the stream we get to go ahead and live like, you know, that external material world does exist, because it behaves the same as if it exists so far. And by that, we mean not just that it exists because illusions exist, but that it's consistent. It exists with a certain consistency. If we keep doing the same experiment in a very similar, you know, a similar way, just a different room, different laser we used, that we'll keep getting compatible results unless our theories were wrong. So, all right.